some more time to hear what the panelists have to say, and then I will log off. Once again, thank you.
Thank you. It was lovely talking to you. The next session is a panel discussion. It will be moderated by Kirti Seth. Kirti Seth leads the Future Skills Initiative at NASSCOM. She has probably spent more years than anyone can count in training and consulting, and has a passion for how to make people learn. After making Future Skills successful in academia and within NASSCOM member firms, she is now getting ready to launch Future Skills Prime Movement for all Indian citizens in the first of its kind partnership between NASSCOM and Ministry of IT. I request Kirti to take over and introduce the panelists and start the session. Thank you, Kirti.
Thanks, Prasad. Lovely to be here and great to listen to Professor Siddharth as well. So I have a great panel in front of me, and it's a nice, I think after Siddharth's session, it's a nice segue to have two people from academia and two people from the learning technology, edtech industry. So a lot of the things that he spoke about, I think should be quite, should come alive in our discussion. So I would first like to welcome Arpit Barjatia, who's the MD and CEO of Cerosoft Solutions. Arpit is a leading technology thinker, innovator, and entrepreneur. A graduate from IIM Calcutta, that's my alma mater, so like you even more, Arpit, and Purdue University in USA. He has founded and led Cerosoft, which is an academia ERP, to be a dominant force in the edtech sector in India. So prior to Cerosoft, he worked with Accenture Consulting and JP Morgan in London. So welcome, Arpit.
Thank you so much, Kirti. That's a nice commonality, actually. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Jolvin Rodriguez is my next panelist. He's the co-founder and global HR head of LearningMate. He's LearningMate Solutions. He's the co-founder of LearningMate Solutions. He's responsible for maintaining the LearningMate culture across the globe. Prior to this role, and actually, Jolvin, you probably have to develop learning culture in whatever work you do. So it's just not for LearningMate that you have to do this. Prior to this role, having also set up the startup operations, and business verticals at LearningMate as well. So welcome, Jolvin.
Thank you, Kirti. Thank you.
And Dr. Asmita Chitnis, who's Director, Symbiosis Institute of International Business. So we have two people from business school here after Siddharth. Postgraduate in statistics, Dr. Asmita holds a PhD in the field of operation management. She started her career with the National Institute of Bank Management as a researcher and worked on different projects of the Reserve Bank of India during this tenure. Then she moved into the teaching domain, and ever since she has more than 29 years of academic and corporate training experience to her credit. So Asmita, you and I have vintage in common. So
okay, good. Good. Thank you so much.
We have Dr. Manas Kumar Mishra, the professor and dean at Vellore Institute of Technology, Bhopal. VIT is also a partner on Future Skills, so welcome, Manas. An academician with more than 21 years of experience in teaching and research. He has successfully administrated teams in the past as the principal, vice principal, head of the department, etc. So all the challenges that Siddharth talked about, of faculty being the most difficult part of an institution, I guess you have first-hand experience of that. He played a pivotal role in IT infrastructure planning as professor in charge of IT infrastructure, and also as mentor for university LMS design and implementation. So you seem to be the one who has the maximum hands-on experience of this whole digitization piece. So good to have you all here.
Thank you.
Siddharth actually set up the context of this discussion quite beautifully. I read a number just recently that higher education has transformed from almost 100% offline to almost 100% online. I mean, I think before COVID, it was probably 2% of education institutions offering online. So this adaptation has, led to, there's massive changes everywhere. And yes, we heard about the low-hanging fruit about moving everything online, But a lot of this is going to not only become permanent, but I think it's going to morph as well. I think entire business models of higher education are going to undergo a change. Siddharth talked about the 3 motivations of why people go to college or go to an institution, a higher education institution. And so this relevance of the in-person student experience, I think that's a big question that the colleges and universities need to answer. And with technology lying, forming this backbone behind this whole changed experience, it would be lovely to hear how service providers are also going to help institutions create that backbone so they can deliver this changed experience of education seamlessly. So I think the first question I'll open up to the panelists is, now you've experienced COVID. I think we've been, it was March when it all began. We're in September now, coming on to almost 6 months. So what is the top challenge that you would like a solution for with this sudden move to digital? And I will go with Dr. Asmita as the first one. And pass the ball from there.
If you're talking about what is the challenge for which I need solution, 2 things come to my mind. Number 1 is poor internet connectivity, poor internet infrastructure that we have in our country. So in most of the rural parts, and even at some parts in urban India, where, because the major challenge is, maybe business school like me, I don't have any problem in my IT infrastructure. I have a good connectivity, but my students are from different parts of the country. So they might come from smaller villages where there is absolutely no connectivity, or there is a major challenge. So that is point number 1, the challenge number 1. And challenge number 2 is, I think, resistance to adopt technology. Because as even the earlier speaker stated, and even you talked about it, because there is a natural resistance. Because of COVID, we have been forced into this particular situation where we have been compelled to adopt technology. Now there are many teachers, so getting good resource is a challenge, but even after getting that good resource, many of them come with experience. They are from the old generation, so they are not so technologically savvy. So to adopt technology is the second challenge. If I talk about my institute, I think we have overcome that challenge in last 3-4 months. But I think that is going to be a challenge across.
That's, you're very, I mean, I think in our earlier session, somebody, I think it was Arpit who brought up that change is the most important thing. If we can figure out how to do change management, I think we'll be well on the way. So I'll pass this on to Arpit now, saying, the whole technology challenge that Asmita has brought up, but from the other side, what do you see as a challenge that you would like to see a solution to?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kirti, and thanks, Dr. Chitnis. So technology is definitely going to offer a lot of solutions, is what we believe. It has, this situation has thrown up tremendous challenges, and as cliched as it may sound, there is tremendous opportunity in this challenge, especially for technology providers like us. And we have kind of worked with the market. If I were to talk about how we are responding to this challenge in terms of technology solutions, we have typically seen tremendous demand for solutions that can facilitate online learning, asynchronous learning, along with remote proctoring, with online assessments, and so on and so forth. So the ability to really continue operations in a blended way, even when the campuses may not be operating in full capacity. And I think this is one place where technology has played a pivotal role. Nelson Mandela said that education is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. And our version at Serosoft, on which we founded it, is technology is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world of education. So I think it is a great opportunity. And as I said, specifically for some of the solutions, we are working hand in hand, vendors like us, technology providers like us, with the academia, and finding solutions together. There's quite a few technology paradigms that are emerging, which are seeing accelerated adoption. I believe what perhaps would have happened in 5 years has happened in 5 months in terms of the openness with which the academia is looking at solutions, adopting technology, and as Dr. Chitnis said, about the resistance which people used to face and have in their minds, it's naturally gone away. It is because you know this is the only way you can even survive. So let alone putting up some resistance around it. And there are a lot of change management techniques that we are kind of implementing while we are deploying technology solutions. And I'll be happy to talk more about that as we go. But that's my initial sense on how a lot of technology vendors like Serasoft are responding to this current situation. And we definitely see an unprecedented opportunity in all this turmoil. Yeah.
So Arpit was totally out of syllabus because he has no challenges at all in this situation. So he's like, there's only opportunity here. No.
Opportunity, exactly.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
So Dr. Manas, over to you. There's all this positivity that Arpit has said. Do you feel it too?
Yeah. The only thing I would like to brought into is that, as Dr. Siddharth has pointed out, we have got AR, VR, all these things, Coursera, and so many other things. It has been existing, but the difference is COVID, instead of, you have talked about the 2% online, those were optional. Those were people who were able to cope up with the technology. Right now, it is more of a compulsory for everybody to adapt. That has made one positive thing, that now it is 100%, and the initial inertia has been gone. But the real challenges, as Dr. Asmita has pointed out, about the bandwidth. We, even in India, we have to cater to a group of people who doesn't have the well equipments. That means they don't have that laptop or mobile sets which can have those videos downloaded. So availability of the content is also a key. So so bandwidth, if it is in the cloud, then bandwidth consumption is important. From the teacher's perspective, now the faculty are well versed of using the technology, but going beyond, like if I create a video, I would like to have a tagging about the important part, so that the student can read out that part which was there in NPTEL videos. People want to emulate the same in their own work. And these features are available in bits and pieces in different service providers. So again, I'm throwing the ball again to Arpit, that we need to club it at one place so that it will be very much adaptive for the faculty.
Thanks for that. And I think it's a perfect segue to Jolvin as well, because the problems of bandwidth and the problem of connectivity and devices and all, they're not going away in a hurry. I mean, these are all affordability issues and people just don't have the money. So content and design and all that is probably something that you can talk to. But before, I mean, maybe you can answer that second, but the first one would be, do you see any challenges here that you would like to see a solution to?
Yeah, I think the big challenge that we can have all the technology, all the content, and I'm talking in a ways, not for the industry that I belong to. You can have all of that in place. The key aspect is, how do you enable faculty to teach better online? I think that is the biggest key for us, and that we see as a challenge. When we are looking at providing any solutions, how do we change that? Because it's not the same, right? I mean, you may think that you've got 20 years of experience, 30 years of experience teaching in a classroom. The minute this goes online, you've fundamentally lost contact with students, and that becomes the biggest challenge for any faculty. In fact, any of us, when we start communicating with virtual imageries. And I think that is one of the big challenges that we have to address. And whether it is providing them with the tool sets in the way they can create that teaching material now, because this is new age teaching material. It has been existing. We may say, Coursera has built it, or some other people have built it, but today you are contextualizing it to what you as a faculty need to teach. And a lot of that is your own, because that is what has been the primary thing for your credibility as a faculty all these years. It is your content, is your notes. It's it's not that every faculty is the same, and we know that, right? I mean, you are because of what material you've created. How do you create that material in the digital world And then obviously all the other questions come into play. Is the bandwidth there? Is the infrastructure there? All of that is going to continuously improve. I mean, we are already at 4G. 5G is right down and it is accessible in a lot of areas. I think, it's even in developed countries, you would find that bandwidth is a challenge. It's not like, India has its own problems. It has problems everywhere. But our ability to kind of help faculty to teach better online, I guess, is the biggest challenge for us. And then to that point, we don't, as a service provider, these are areas that you'd like to work with, right? How do you kind of enable that whole process? What systems do we need to build for them? And this is not about, you going and buying content off the shelf. That's the easiest piece, but that doesn't necessarily always differentiate your content from someone else. So I think that's what I would put as, the big challenge at this point.
So what I hear you say is also that, yes, there are challenges of bandwidth and there are challenges of connectivity and content, but there are things changing and things will continue to change. So then I move to my next question to say that with this situation the way it is, and some things being good and some things not being so good, what is going to become permanent? I mean, I know in the previous speaker, we heard about a lot of changes, and I even referred to changes in business models, but is there going to be a permanent transformation of higher education because of this whole complete move to digitization? And I'll continue with you, Jolvin, and then we can.
Yeah, I think what we've not realized, and while COVID has been like an eye-opener, we haven't realized, there's been a stealth mode of content being created in the world, right? YouTube has generated probably tons of content, and there is so many providers who have created such a lot of content that is digital already, right? So for us to leverage that, I think that's where the next part of the conversation comes in. This whole angle of content curation. How do we kind of make that available? And and that is the permanency, right? The permanency exists in content that's already created. It is getting generated even today. And if you really see what the big shift that's happening, I mean, if you just go out there, go to YouTube and see how many new YouTubers have come in, teaching everything from cooking to, anything and everything. It's just exploded. It's a massive, movement that has happened. Anybody and everybody who knows something and can, give it off to, the audience that's available is teaching today. So what you're creating today is a plethora of content that is getting generated, and that is going to be permanent. I mean, nothing, on the internet, it is like it said, right? It is everything that is put out there is for posterity, and and that's what it is. So that's, I would say, is a big area that we should probably think about when we're saying what is the permanency. The permanency is all of this material that is getting created, and it will continue to get created because now people have gotten used to creating online, and this will obviously, this is a revolution in that sense. And it will keep going down to people even down the line. I mean, yes, the TikToks of the world have been banned, but if you see the kind of content that has come in, it is coming from the hinterland, right? It's not from the creme de la creme of the cities and stuff like that. There is some content getting created that probably gets transformed to something that can be useful. You have a different story.
And so this is a question to both Dr. Manas and to Dr. Asmita, saying that with this content creation and so much of it being available out there, what does it mean for institutions like yours? Is content still king? I mean, do you still, will you still be looking at what you can create as universities? Will you be leveraging this open source content available? Will you be buying content? What is your view of this permanency and this, I like the stealth mode of content creation, that there's just so much out there. Do you still need to create more? Dr. Asmita, you're on mute.
So with the new changes, in fact, it has become very highly competitive, I would say. And if you look at the NEP, new policy, education policy, even they are talking about the academic credit bank, so academic bank of credit. So they are talking about that, which means student can be really demanding now. They can earn some credits from my university. They can also earn some credits from the other university. In that case, unless and until I enhance the quality of the content that I'm going to deliver, it is going to be extremely challenging to retain those customers. So for me, customers are students. So my customers are anyways king. We always say that, but it is going to be highly demanding. That is point number one. Point number two is now, because of this online teaching, that people have now come into, they have changed their mindset. They are not only looking for in-person meeting, but they are okay with virtual learning. Now, in that scenario, in fact, they are expecting more flexibility, more convenience, more continuity in the content delivery. They want courses which will be self-paced. So they want to learn the way they want to do it whenever they have time. So these are going to be new normals. That's what I feel. So it is going to be highly competitive, and even we have different content platforms. We have even Swayam, but I'm very sorry to say that the quality of content on Swayam is not up to the mark. But this COVID has given us opportunity to think differently. As I said earlier, we were not having that mindset to go virtually, but because now we have adopted technology, we have tried it now almost for last 2-3 months. So we are ready to change. So I think first hurdle we have crossed. Now the second hurdle is how do we develop that infrastructure so that we are able to create that content which will have good quality, and how we are going to entertain and engage our students through these platforms. So that is going to be the new challenge, but I think we are moving in that direction. Because even now we are having synchronous, asynchronous learning, and it's very challenging. For example, if a person is teaching business statistics or any analytical course or financial management, now traditional teacher would like to have a whiteboard and marker. That is true even for me, because I teach statistics. So the first thing which came to my mind when I decided to go online is how I am going to replace that whiteboard so that people understand, they should understand. So I want that digital board, so, and now it's very easy. So the point is you have to put in extra efforts to engage students, because ultimately what they want that knowledge, and they also want their teacher to make them understand that. So if teacher is going to put something extra to make it interesting, I think we can sell through.
You'll be able to retain your customers.
Yes, no doubt about it. As I said, there is intense competition in the market.
Yes. The things that will be permanent, first of all, you might have heard of, I'm giving that engineering perspective to it. The credit-based, choice-based credit system, CBCS, has been there for a longer period. We adopted at VIT with a name called as Fully Flexible Credit System, FFCS. So now every higher education institute has to adopt the CBCS, because student will be saying, asking the management that I have X course offered by some of that credit. Why should I read it from here? And so that will be one permanent change. The second, and we have started this. If I quote the example, we have got 4 campuses: Vellore, Chennai, Bhopal, and Amravati. And during this summer time when we were locked down, our early semester was over. So we had started a VIT OL, just like the Coursera, but within these 4 campuses. So people from Bhopal are able to take up a course which is offered by Vellore faculty. So this was not there earlier. And because of this lockdown, we could do this. So that also has bridged that gap of old campus or new campus, and also gave the student a feeling that this entire learning is universal. It is not about where you are located. So that will be again change. And from the faculty side, as just to add to the Galvin's point, as he had pointed out, that I have seen even few other universities, when the faculty create a content with their video, initial hiccups are there, like they are a little bit worried about how they look on the video, whether they, there's a huge difference between online and offline. But once they create a video, everybody feels like, I will put it on YouTube, it's free. And on a long run, probably a lot of people will come to YouTube, and that, again, that inertia is removed. People are online and they feel like, okay, they can express, and it will use it will add a lot of confidence as well as a different dimension to the way people teach. So these things will be permanent in my view.
And Arpit, since you're going to be giving the tools to make all this happen, what do you think? How are you seeing? What is changing in the way institutions are responding to your ERP?
Yeah, so I think one, there are 3-4 changes. If I start with how they're responding to the ERP and softwares like that, I believe a permanent shift in higher education will be towards emergence of data-driven institutions. And I believe that the lockdown and this current period has provided every institution to organize their data tracking, their data assimilation and analysis. It may be happening through Excel, it may be happening through a more sophisticated ERP like ours. But I believe because everyone has been working remotely, every stakeholder is concerned about some sort of data to make decisions about the future. There will be an emergence of data-driven institutions because of the more organization around data that has been done. What this will entail will be about, as I said in my first part as well, there will certainly be a faster emergence of artificial intelligence, machine learning based models, because you have more data, you can tune those AI ML models. All of those AI ML models feed on actual data and then figure out the trends around it, right? So I believe this will be again a great insight for many institutions to use that data to work. So, certain examples are, we are working with some institutions where they're now saying that based on all the past data of applicants, we want to find which is the ideal fit candidate to apply in our institution and get an admission. So that piece of shortlisting software can do on your behalf based on certain attributes, etc. This is just one example. So one permanent shift I see is emergence of data-driven institution. Second, I see the relationship between higher education and the place of learning is perhaps going to be permanently altered. And I think a couple of our panelists have also touched upon this point. But what I mean by this is that time on campus now may be seen as more precious. And some of the activities that can be moved to asynchronous online platforms, let's say such as content delivery, right? Assessments, which students can see sitting at their home as well. Students can attempt assessments sitting at their home. Those experiments having been done over the past 4-5 months by multiple institutions, they have gained tremendous confidence that some of these things can actually happen online. And that whole stigma of saying that an exam can never happen without having a proctor in place, etc., and starting emergence of new models around it is happening right now. I can give you an example of my nephew who was just writing an exam, and it was his first open book test in his entire 3-year degree. And suddenly these teachers had adapted to saying that, okay, you might look up Google, but what we are going to test you right now is just conceptual understanding, which is great for the education system again. So the second trend, as I said, is the relationship between the higher education and place will be permanently altered. I believe the campus time will be dedicated to more value add stuff, and a lot of things will be moved to online platforms, which hitherto were being done face to face, but people would realize that this is better done online. And lastly, I do believe that the emergence of skill-based learning, and you know that a lot of websites have come up, there's tremendous funding available, people have created great content, as many of the panelists have said. And I believe the skill-based learning, these courses, small courses, modules, will pose a serious threat over the long term to the standard higher education brick and mortar model. Because I think in a value conscious society like India, people are always looking at what will I pay and what will I get. And if I can really do a 2-month course on a Udemy and Coursera, and my employers are looking at me as seriously as a 4-year engineering program, then why would I invest the 3.5 years? So it's classical value conscious mentality which will drive this. And I think good content will lead to this, and there is starting to emerge fairly good content across these platforms. We use a lot in our company as well, and I believe the skill-based learning, modular learning, will be a serious competition to higher education, which maybe till date it wasn't, and it will also enable personalized learning. So people can learn at their own pace. They can study what they want. It could be vocational, it could be hobby like, it could be something related just for getting a job, and so on and so forth. So I think there are many permanent shifts I see, but in the interest of time, I thought these three really crossed my mind immediately.
No, thanks for that. And the points that all the panelists have brought out takes us to the next question, which has been touched upon by everybody, about teachers and faculty. The new education policy that we are all familiar with, I think the whole issue of faculty development has been called out like probably never before. I mean, faculty and now really has become, I love that, the line in the policy which said that we have to make the teacher, elevate the teacher, to give the teacher the respect that they deserve in society, because the multiplier effect a good teacher has is just unassailable. But if we are now looking at change in pedagogy because of the way content is available and the way content is being delivered and the way teaching is done, if we're looking at the use of AI and ML, your whole data-driven, approach to institutions, the use of tools. We have, Dr. Asmita talked about her digital board, and somebody else is talking about a learning management system, and you already have an ERP. There's this competitiveness that all the institutions are going to go through because of content now being available, micro content being a threat to what happens to teachers. How are we going? This is, is there, because they're our most precious resource. So over to the academicians for this, since I think you're frontline and center on this problem.
Yeah, see, no matter how much we move to and looking, when a teacher is teaching someone, getting those expressions from the students about the actual understanding of the concept cannot be replaced by this online teaching. And we as Indians, we are so much into it that we want to see the person, right? And anybody for that matter, not only Indians. So even now, when I'm taking classes in a synchronous mode, students are saying that, no, we want to come back to campus as soon as possible. We are even ready to give you undertaking. We are ready to take risks. Please allow us to come to campus. That is something that we cannot avoid and that cannot be replaced. That is point number one. Point number two is that whenever, because even when I'm teaching on the screen, I can see hardly 10 or 15 faces, right? Even there are some people who are not able to see me because of the lack of internet connectivity. So that bonding is not getting created. Second part is, so of course we have to train the teachers, we have to make them, empower them so that they make those classes more engaging. But the real problem lies when it comes to engineering and science subjects, where there are lab works. So how are you going to replace that experiential learning and lab work? So teachers will be trained, fine. But there are some areas where even if we train them, how are you going to teach students in those areas? So of course, I'm touching the main question, but my real challenge is here that I will, because even in Symbiosis, what we did in the month of May and June, we conducted number of FDPs for our faculty to make them understand how to adopt various technologies. We did that. So right now, if you ask me, I think almost 70–80% of people are quite comfortable. But that's not the content that what we see on Coursera or Udemy. We haven't gone to that level. But at least we have been able to get solution to the problem, that we are able to engage students in a right way. So of course that training will have to continue. So because new features will get added. But the problem is, even there are breakout sessions. For example, when I conduct my class in a Microsoft team, then there are breakout sessions. So I can put them in a smaller group so they can talk to each other. So these are different features which are available in on some platforms. But my teachers, there are certain aspects of teaching which cannot happen in virtual platform.
So you have an online program to upskill your faculty.
Yes.
The challenge of hands-on, I think, is real. Maybe I don't know, you're the academicians. So, but
yeah.
Dr. Manas, over
Yeah,
to you.
I fully agree with Dr. Asmita. Like we can train the faculty, and I'm a very firm believer. Of course, in Indian context, sometimes this doesn't hold true, but the new generation of faculties, all the research happen in academia. It's not that industry is latest. It is always the academia which gives latest technologies. So I know faculty are adopting. The only thing is that we may be a little hesitant to adopt something. But with all those faculty, with doctoral, with research, they are adaptive. They want to adapt to technology, so there is no problem. And as we are discussing, it will gradually go towards open book, project-based learning. But for few labs, like I can replace a computer lab because programming can have an online, compiler, and I can make the student work on that. But what about those mechanical branches, the civil, where you have that look and feel kind of thing, where you see the, motor working? You cannot teach somebody in a virtual reality. The person can know about the internal combustion engine, but
Unless
the listening or the feel of a engine, revolving is more important. So you cannot train those, you cannot conduct everything online. If that goes online, then probably we will, and as rightly pointed out by Dr. Asmita, India has been that Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu kind of thing. And if we really go online, then we will really become Brahma Vishnu only on the pictures, right? So we need to have that personal touch. Actually, because our kids, jokes apart, we have those kids who lack this personal touch. So our faculty in India is not only a knowledge provider, he's also a default counselor. That counselor part or connect that we establish on offline, hard to get in online. That connect is missing, will be missing. You cannot train faculty.
And just to add to what he said, see, we have a lot of affiliation with universities in Europe, in fact. So when I was exchanging these ideas that how are you training your teachers to adopt technology or to go online? In fact, we are quite fast. We were quite quick. So everyone adopted technology, even right from school. So all school teachers did it. So when the school started or for 10th standard classes started, then we said to ourselves, oh, they are being able to do it, so we have to do it. So everyone did it. But if you ask what is happening in the United States or even in Germany or in Europe for that matter, people are still not ready to go online. So I would say because we Indians are quite flexible, to be honest, and we adopt, right? When we are forced into something, we definitely adopt. And I think we are better off.
So good. So at least our academicians are quite positive about the faculty development. It doesn't look like to be a challenge, but the hands-on, the face-to-face, that feel of the internal combustion engine. So what our EdTech panelists have to say to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Arpit.
Okay. So Kirti, on that part, what I remember one very good saying that I read somewhere, which says, technology will never replace great teachers, but in the hands of great teachers, it's transformational. And I believe we are also discussing this in the context of NEP, which focuses on, a apex body of HECI, vernacularization, credit bank, as was said, a focus on liberal arts education. I think at the center piece of all this is the teacher. And I think the whole idea around the faculty development will be based on technology, but you also need different things like investing the real time from an institutional perspective. We have seen that, the money or the intent, and then the tools. As a provider, we obviously can help all the institutions with the tools. How we are kind of incorporating that in our solutions right now is to always think about faculty when we are designing a new feature or rolling out something new. We always keep the student at the center point of that. But I also believe while usage and while adoption of technology, we have to keep in mind that the faculty would be slightly more in terms of their age, etc., and it would be that much more difficult for them to adopt technology. So we have to have that empathy and that sensitivity to say that when we design solutions, we don't keep the 21st century user in mind, but also have a lot of teachers who might be the first time users for technology and then utilize those tools for their own development. I also believe that, from a larger institutional perspective, the professional development goals for teachers will have to be linked to the larger institutional goals, and that's some work for the education leaders to do. And I think that will also pave way for the way faculties are developed. There are also some case studies that I was reading about, buddy programs which are run in US universities, where some of the more advanced users of technology, maybe the younger faculty is tagged with a slightly elderly faculty who may have a little more challenge dealing with technology. So I think we will have to work together. As a service provider, it's not only the technology tool that we get to the table, but the whole intent, the whole ideation, which we can collaborate with the academia to make sure that teachers are able to develop themselves to adapt to this new change, both in the wake of COVID and in the impending change of the NEP that's coming at us in the next few years.
Thanks, Jolwin.
Yeah, so I think as online education as such, I really don't think that is something that is going to be all pervasive and everybody would be only doing everything online. Because I don't think there is merit in even believing that. Because traditionally, yes, that is face-to-face is great, but the real mid path is the blended path, right? Wherein you are able to kind of leverage technology, and that is where technology comes in. Technology is not come here to replace faculty. I don't think that is how it should be looked at. Technology is an enabler, and that's what we believe even at LearningMate. It's an enabler. It is getting us to make lives better out there, whether it's the lives of the faculty, the lives of the students, the administration, whoever it is, right? It is basically to kind of get that's the goal of building all of this. Now, I guess the only thing to kind of work with is the rigidity that technology will come in and replace jobs or replace faculty. I think that is where is a mind shift that would need to be there. And however better we can counsel faculty to kind of adapt technology, because if you're kind of going to be adopting it, you will be able to kind of teach better, right? For example, there have been models that have been successfully met by a lot of institutions, wherein they've changed them from their face-to-face model to a blended or a flipped classroom model, right? Wherein you actually teach the concepts are taught online. They're not really taught by the faculty, because the faculty has invested, curated, and spent that time to kind of build that out. Where the value add comes in for the student is when the faculty is able to answer those questions for them, and that is the differentiator. While we especially in India, the whole Guru Shishya concept is very high. It's broken in the US or somewhere else, primarily because there's so much of content available, and faculty have not been able to understand how do we kind of what's our value add, right? Our value add, is it just to impart instruction, or is it to solve problems? And when you kind of go to that point where the faculty is given that importance of being able to solve those problems, because that's where their knowledge is. No matter how much Google you serve, you will not be still able to catch up with what your faculty knows, because they've got experience, based on that. And I think that is one of the big things that, from a faculty motivation standpoint, the models, and flipped class is probably just one model. There are tons of other models that can be implemented to make this better. The other challenge that is there, and which will probably need to be pushed, is the way businesses look at credentialing, right? For example, our business is just looking for, and I think Professor Manas probably touched on that. Is it necessary that a degree program is required to get a job anymore, right? Or is it that just credentialing is enabling faculty to jobs to be given? And where that difference is there is when people will have, I mean, even faculty will have to kind of mold their thought process to enable, students to kind of get what they need. And I guess it probably also, aligns with the NEP that's coming up. You're on mute.
The credentialing piece that you brought up, actually, I just wanted to link it to something that Professor Siddharth said, and also so a question that has been asked, is that when you have so much content out there, you've got curated content, you've got contextualized content created in the institution, you've got content that you can buy off Coursera's of the world, or, there's so much even academic content out there you can buy. How does the signaling happen? Like today it's a little easy, you have your tier 1 institutions, tier 2 institutions, tier 3 institutions, you have marks, you have this degree, you just sort of, you slice and dice it in these broad ways and you're done. But with so much flexibility, individualization, personalization, choice-based credit system, flexibility, how do you signal who's good, who's not good? How will it work?
Yeah, I think that's where data comes into play, right? I mean, all the feedback that is coming in for that content that's generated is kind of defining, and it is happening across all industries, not just education. How you shop today is defined by what feedback you've received. How you, who you go to is all based on references and based on stuff like that. And the same thing will kind of continue with education, because as you kind of go to look at content in that aspect and see who has acknowledged it, or who has said that this is great content to go after, you're going to kind of gravitate towards that, because that's really the signal that is required. What is basically at the heart of it is how is the data engine working, and is that really is the tagging really powerful? Are the taxonomies powerful enough for you to be able to kind of take those conversations to that next level, so that when credentialing is actually looked at, you may want to go to this particular university you go to it because of a certain reason, right? And it is very similar in terms of how it'll work, because that would come in from a data engine that will power all of it.
So how do you look? I mean, I'm looking at it from the businesses and the employers' point of view. While on the one hand, all this flexibility is great content out there, but how will they evaluate who is this student? Is he good? Is he not good? Or will they do their own evaluations? How will it work?
Yeah, generally, what happens in the current scenario before pandemic, whenever student take a MOOC and to transfer the credit, the onus is back on the university, who is actually the student is enrolled with, to have because all the different MOOC will have different grading system. So we have to come to a common umbrella so that we can tell, or we take the kind of ownership that, okay, this credit, whatever the student has earned, we endorse that. So that kind of thing will happen. And on the content, whether it is good, as John also say, because like Dr. Asmita said, SWAYAM is pathetic. We have already accepted, in Indian MOOC, we either NPTEL is okay. We are still talking about Coursera. We are not, the HRD ministry is putting a lot of, I'm not using any unpolitical, unconstitutional word, but it's trying all possibility. But still, SWAYAM is not getting that acceptance. It's only because people know the content is not that level. So
we're hoping that so this Future Skills Initiative, which is a partnership between NASSCOM and MIT, I think one of the reasons why MIT decided that we'll partner with NASSCOM was that since you guys are the industry, then you will bring that quality consciousness to the content, because if you are the employers, you better know what content to put on it. So hopefully then the learner will get something relevant and something meaningful from a contextual point of view. So maybe that was the thinking, that it didn't go back to some other department in the ministry. They said, okay, let's take it out. Hopefully we will deliver to the promise. Let's see.
Now, to add with the future skill initiative also, VIT has been a part of it, and our faculty, the Train the Trainer program, has gone through the training, and I know the certification which you are providing after the training happens and the faculty has to earn the certification. That itself is quite a rigorous process. It's not that it's very easy. So if you can ensure the quality of the trainer, obviously we can have a high probability of the training process being qualitative.
And that was, I mean, again, talking from the Sector Skills Council perspective, the whole idea of creating the standards and all that was that, you know, can we have a uniform benchmark to which everyone can align to? It has not quite worked out that way, but I mean, philosophically, everyone agrees. But now with this whole flexibility coming into, you know, so much out there, I think this standards conversation is in itself acquiring a whole new perspective.
Yeah, probably we need to have one more panel discussion on that.
Yes. So I'm just going to take a couple of questions which have come up. So, of course, I think people have taken the feedback of what the panel says, that I don't think education is going to become 100% digital and classrooms are here to stay, albeit in a blended mode. So somebody's suggesting that we should just get COVID-proof classrooms. All power to you, sir. I hope we can do that, but it all depends on who believes it. There is another question on how do you get students to attend? Because with all this thing going online, where 60 kids in a class, but only 5 attend. So how do you inspire people to come on?
Maybe I can come in. So I don't face that as a problem, because we are at a higher level in the sense they are postgraduate students. So they know what they want, why they are here. So in fact, in the first session itself, I told them that, look guys, we won't be able to see whether you are mentally in the class or not. And that is not my concern, because if you're really keen to participate and learn something, you need to be there. Because in the virtual platform, what happens, they will just log in, as rightly said, and they will just go around and they might not be mentally, but that anyways happens even in in-person classroom, to be honest. People are physically present, but they're mentally somewhere out. So the point, actually the onus lies with students. Of course, your engagement should be interesting. You should give them quizzes or something from time to time so that people are engaged and they are involved in the process. So also, as I said, there are breakout sessions, so you can give them that flexibility to work in smaller groups, discuss something. And in fact, this synchronous and asynchronous learning, which is a blended form, it is actually very useful. So what we are doing is we are uploading videos. So we ask students to watch those videos. So those are based on the conceptual learning. So students are expected to watch those videos and then come back to the synchronous learning where the discussion happens. So it is expected that everyone knows the concept, and then we are going to discuss cases or live examples so that that class becomes more entertaining and engaging. So it's up to
what Jolvin mentioned, the flip.
Yeah, so it's up to the faculty how to make it more interesting. You have to make it interesting. And if you're looking at the screen, it's a wall with, as I said, 7 or 8 faces. Sometimes people don't even start their videos, so it is frustrating at times. But then you have to think out of box and you have to engage them with various activities, and it's doable. It's doable.
So I think that actually answers another question that has come up on engagement.
I have a question.
Hello?
Can I ask a question, Kirti? Can
Yes,
I ask
please.
a question? Am I audible?
Yeah, I'll just finish up. I think
So question. Yeah,
there was another question on engagement, and I'm just taking what Dr. Asmita said, that it's up to the faculty to create an engaging session so people stay. So that answers that question as well. Over to you, Prasad.
So the question is, do you think the order will change here? The education will be democratized to the extent that, people say, why should I do 3 years course? I can do it in 1 year. And more than institutions, the professors will become the brand. Do you think that change of order will happen?
Yes.
Because, Symbiosis, especially, you are a pioneer in remote education. This is just an extension to that.
Yes.
No,
No,
it won't matter actually how you are, what institution you're passing. No, your knowledge would matter. The companies will not come on campus. They will invite students to campus. They will assess them, and no matter whether you are an engineer or you are, postgraduate, if you know your stuff, that's what we are looking for, and that would may change the entire order. People may not pursue the disciplined way of learning. They will just go. It's like you talk about student attention. It's like Netflix binge watching, right? You will also go for education in that mode where you will do binge education.
it's very difficult to say at this point, but I feel ultimately when you are applying for a job, what recruiter is looking at is what extra you're going to bring to table, right? If you're able to talk sense, if you have knowledge, so no matter where you graduate from, because that's going to happen eventually. If a person is going to earn credits from, say, University X, some credits from University Y, some credits, I think it will take a while for even corporates to acknowledge that. But the point is that later on, when they are actually going to assess the person for employment, they are going to focus on the skill set and his or her ability to work with that organization, right? So slowly those barriers will go. But my point is that right now it is not going to happen that quickly, because still people would like to go to IIMs and get the degree. If not IIM, then maybe they will come to us. So that will happen, no doubt about it. So it is not going to go away that quickly. That's what I feel.
I also feel in the same way. Like if we look into the campus placements, the companies, because of the volume of graduates that come out of colleges in India, the companies cannot go for an open drive. That's why they pick and choose the institute, thinking that the process will be better and the student quality will be better. So
also, yeah, maybe, please go ahead.
Go ahead.
And NIRF ranking is going to stay there for sure, right? So recruiters are going to look at these rankings, NAC accreditation. So all these things are now mandated. So corporates will go and look at those rankings, and based on that only they are going to identify institutions, because tier 1, 2, 3, that will remain. It will not go that easily. That will not go easily. That's what I feel.
And until unless the companies come up with, as Arpit has pointed out, some AI-based solution for the elimination round, going for a larger mass will be very difficult. That's one.
Yes.
Arpit, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. So I think the question was around, whether teachers, the kind of teacher would become more important than the institution itself. And I believe for certain cases, it's already happening for vocational courses, etc. For example, the whole emergence of Khan Academy was based on one person's talent, and then it's become a big company in itself, a large company that's impacting the way education functions, right? So I do believe technology, as has always been said, provides for that democratization and the reach that institutions have. But at the same time, I believe that it is the institutions par excellence that are going to consolidate their position even further. That is one trend that I believe is going to emerge in the short term and also in the long term. Short term, especially because I believe the ones that are par excellence have a brand that is recognized. And when you have a chaotic situation, brand is the exact opposite. People gravitate towards a brand. So from that perspective, leading institutions of par excellence will continue to do well. They'll perhaps grow even bigger. It is the challenge for some of the low tier, mid tier institutions who will have to find a way to meaningfully deliver value to the end student. And then only they can be in business or grow from there.
And perhaps the corollary to that is, Arpit, that if you don't do it, if you are an institute of eminence and you don't do it, you're very quickly going to fall down the line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So elimination will be quick this time.
Yeah. So I think we are almost out of time. I just want to take a minute I referred to the Future Skills Initiative, and while it is a NASSCOM initiative and a mighty initiative, I think the one statement that we keep making is that the scale of the change and the challenge is so high that it requires everybody to work together, whether it is industry, academia, government, everybody has to come and pitch in some shape or form. We've actually been very fortunate in some of the partners that we have got onto the platform. People have really come forward and contributed content, and people have helped us, guide us, and how to create diagnostics and assessments. And NASSCOM does nothing. Like, we are just a body that brings people together, and we are very lucky that we're able to bring a really, really good. I mean, this panel is a great example. So we're able to bring people together. So please participate in the movement in any way you can or you'd like to. We hope to launch sometime in November, which will be open to, as I said, to everybody. So it'd be lovely that at that time, when you all can come take a look and raise your hand and say, we'd like to pitch in this way or that way. It would be fantastic, because the more inclusive we are, I think the more successful we'll be. But thank you for a delightful discussion. I enjoyed it a lot. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. So Prasad, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kirti, for moderating this session. And thank you, panelists. Thanks for your time. These are valuable insights. In fact, if we look at it positively, probably we'll be able to attract with our skill and knowledge the foreign students, especially in this virtual era. With this, we are concluding this session. As a token of our gratitude, we have planted trees on your behalf in Buldhana district of Maharashtra. This is the exercise we have been doing since the last couple of years. We have planted more than 2,000 trees. It's a small contribution from our side to immediate farmers' life. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirti, and thank you to all the panelists. Thank you, Prasad.
Thank you
It was a
all.
great session.
Bye.
Thank you so
Take
much.
care and stay safe.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.